Hello and welcome to the first video for GCSE help on GCSE AQA psychology. Our first video will be about the general outline of the course, the structure of the questions that you will use in your answers, what questions they may ask you, and the course itself. So it's split into two papers, paper 1 being memory, perception, development and research methods, and paper 2 being social influence, language, thought and communication, brain and neuropsychology, and psychological problems. Both are an hour and 45 minutes and both are 100 marks. So let's cover one of the most common questions that you will come across, and I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with. They are MCQs or multiple choice questions. But for AQA, they are quite specific and they're quite strict. If you do not use the correct method to answer the question, you will be marked down. You will lose the mark or marks. For the correct method, you must colour in this little oval in the middle correctly. You cannot go around, you can't colour it like this. You can't do any of these responses here. The only correct way is this, otherwise you will be marked down and there is no mercy. So, for example, for question 1 here, which one of these is a description of episodic memory, shade 1 box only? When it says shade 1 box only, it's usually only 1 mark. So, what you want, you can also have 2 mark questions, so it can be shade 2 box only, 2 boxes, but in this case it's only 1. So the answer to this question is A, a memory of a personal experience. So we will shade it in just like that, and that's perfect. And that is the correct answer. That'll be 1 mark added to your total. Bosh. Okay, next, the structure of some of the questions that you will be answered. So you can get a lot of different types of questions. The marks you can achieve will range from 1 mark to 9 marks. You can't have a 7 marker, you can't have an 8 marker, and you can have 1 mark, 2 mark, 3 mark, 4 mark, 5 mark, 6 mark, but no 7, 8 mark. And obviously you have 9 markers. So for this question, it's asking you to explain one weakness of using a stratified sampling when conducting research. In this question, it's asking you to evaluate stratified sampling. Evaluation is just providing analysis of the strengths and weaknesses of whatever you're being asked. In this case, it's also giving you a STEM, so it's looking for you to apply your knowledge to this STEM, and that will gain you the 2 marks. So the most effective way of answering a question like this is using PBT. Point, because, and therefore. Using PBT will almost guarantee you to get the 2 marks. So for most questions asking you to explain one weakness or one strength, it's almost always 2 marks. So what I've written here is our point. One disadvantage of stratified sampling of sixth form students is that it can be time consuming and complex to carry out. This is because the researcher must first identify all the relevant strata or subgroups, e.g. race of the students in the year, and then randomly sample from each one proportional to the frequency of that race in the population. So some of you may know that stratified sampling is exactly what this describes. If you have a population, let's say the sixth form students, half of the population are white, and 30% of the population are black, and 20% are other. We would then use these proportions, these percentages, in our sample. So 50% of our sample will be white, 30% will be black, and 20% will be other. So therefore, this makes the process more complicated than for example, simple random sampling, and may not be practical for larger or hard to categorize populations. What this means is that instead of using a more simple method of taking a sample, this makes it extremely hard, and not hard, but quite complex and maybe time consuming. So you'd have to take each population, count up how many white people there are, how many black people there are, how many people of other races there are, calculate the percentages and apply that to your sample. Whereas, for example, random sampling may take just all the names, put it into a random number generator, assign a number to each student, put in a random number generator, and take the numbers, and that is your random sampling is finished. But using stratified sampling can take a while. So this here would be your 2 marks. It seems quite a lot for 2 marks, but it is what it is. This can be applied to any question basically, and for example, if you want to do a strength of stratified sampling, you would use the same PBT structure, but just changing each point. For example, a strength of stratified sampling is that it helps ensure subgroup representation. Stratified sampling is easily the most representative sampling method. This is because the researcher divides the population into meaningful strata, which are subgroups, such as year group, subject, or ability, and samples from each population. The sample is more likely to reflect all parts of the population. In this case, it's ability or subject, but in the other case, it could be race. It's more reflective of the race of the entire population. Therefore, the findings about how students use their study lessons are more generalizable towards and less biased towards one group. So for example, there could be a race bias if you're not using stratified sampling. There could be a gender bias, or there could just be a general bias towards another group of people that do, for example, math and economics, but not psychology, because there could not and there might not be enough psychology students in the sample. Therefore, it's not reflective of the psychology students in the year. Furthermore, here is your 9-mark questions. As I said before, you can be asked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 9 markers. You can also have 6 markers, so a 6 marker may be describe, but in more depth. It could also be evaluate, so for example, it could be evaluate 2 weaknesses and a strength of Penfield study. Evaluate, for example, or another example may be evaluate the biological approach to depression. It could be literally anything. But in this case, we have our 9 markers. Our 9 markers are our big questions that we need to be spending the most time on and taking a very slow, calm approach. So for this question, it says the theory of reconstructive memory states that people recreate their memories by actively using what they already know and believe about the world. So this is some information, some general information that may be used to, remind you of the study in case you've forgotten it. I hope not. But describe and evaluate one study that has investigated reconstructive memory. So firstly, every single 9 marker that you'll come across will always ask you to describe and evaluate. Like we've just done before, evaluate is PBT. So this is split up into not halves, but for our description. So our description is worth 4 marks. And this is our A01 marking criteria. And our evaluation is, believe it or not, worth 5 marks. This is for the general structure of a 9 marker, so just a normal example. And this is our A03. You may be wondering, where did AO2 go? AO2 is for questions that provide a stem or ask us to apply. It could also be for comparison. So, but we're not on that yet. For this question, it's asking us to describe and evaluate one study that has invested reconstructive memory. There are a couple, but some of them you don't study. So for this one, I've chosen the War of the Ghost study. Actually, this is the only one you study. The War of the Ghost study is Bartlett's study of reconstructive memory. It's a study that investigates how our memory changes when we are asked to recall a series of events or a story, in this case the War of the Ghost story, and how we change the order, how we possibly shorten it, how we omit, so shorten some of the content. So using this mark scheme, well, not using the mark scheme, but using my knowledge, I've written, I think I'd say, a pretty good 9 marker. So for our description, it's asking us, basically the description is saying pretty much describe the study, what they did, what was their method, blah blah blah, and also what they found out. So Bartlett's War of the Ghost study investigated how memory is reconstructed and influenced by cultural expectations. British participants were given a Native American story and asked to record it after a delay, with some retelling it multiple times over different time periods. Bartlett recorded each version and found that participants tended to remember the key themes, but often shortened the story and omitted unfamiliar details. Some elements were changed to better fit their own cultural understanding. For instance, canoes were often recalled as boats. Bartlett concluded that memory is not a direct recall of events, but is reconstructed based on existing cultural schemas. Our schema is just a pre-existing knowledge or perspective on a certain thing, object, concept, theory, whatever. So here it's split into our different areas of our description. So we have our results here, and also our method. You can also have the aim here, and yeah. So next is our evaluation. So our evaluation, again using PBT, would get you your 5 marks. So for evaluations, you you should always aim for at least 3 evaluation points, whether that be 2 strengths and a weakness, a strength and 2 weaknesses, or even 3 weaknesses and a strength. An evaluation point also can mean the importance of the study. So how important was the study in investigating reconstructive memory, and we'll investigate that here. So for our evaluation, Bartlett's War of the Ghost study has both strengths and limitations. A key strength is that retelling a story is a more natural and meaningful way of testing memory than using word lists, which can, as we know, be inaccurate due to, for example, Murdoch's recall position curve and the serial position effect. Additionally, the study has helped us understand a meaningful way of testing memory than using word lists, increasing the ecological validity of the findings. So here, it would be our point and our because, and then finally our therefore. Increasing the ecological validity of the findings means that it has higher generalizability to a wider population, because it's a better way of investigating how our memory works. Additionally, so our next one, the study has helped us understand that memory is reconstructive, our point, and also influenced by cultural beliefs and expectations. This is useful, because, in explaining the unreliability of eyewitness testimonies. Therefore, this increases again the ecological or external validity, how generalizable and how applicable the study is to other scenarios, other situations, a larger population. However, one weakness is that the story was unfamiliar and confusing for British participants. which may have caused inaccurate recall and limited the study's reliability. Reliability is how consistent the results are. So if you were to not use British participants, the results may not be the same because the content of the story used words that may or may not be familiar to your sample. Another disadvantage is that only consisted of English students at Cambridge University, making it difficult to generalize the findings due to gender and sample bias. So on this one, it's saying that English students at Cambridge University, this creates gender bias, so it's androcentric, which you may say, I don't know if that's GCSE, but it's androcentric, it's only using male participants. And evidently, male participants act differently towards females, but you do not know if that will affect recall, and the only way to test that is using female participants. They also used participants from Cambridge University. Cambridge is a very prestigious school where students are used to memorizing, therefore they may be better at memorizing. So that's another point there. So there's gender and sample bias. Okay, that's a typical 9-mark study. Another example could be literally anything. It could be describe and evaluate Murdoch's serial position study. Describe and evaluate literally anything, any study, any theory you can think of that you cover in GCSE psychology, you can be asked a 9-marker on. You can also be asked 9 markers on not exactly studies and theories, but also concepts. So I've seen a couple 9 markers, for example, of describe and evaluate the use of interviews in psychological research, describe and evaluate the use of observations in psychological research, describe and evaluate literally anything. You might be unlucky, but you also might be lucky. So next one, synoptic questions. Synoptic questions are the questions that generally catch a lot of students out. They are quite hard, and your teacher understands that, I understand that. As a previous psychology student, they were pretty hard. A synoptic question is basically linking in different areas of the course together. So in this example, you are linking Bartlett's theory is from the memory topic, and at least one theory of language and thought, which is from the language, thought, and communication topic. So it's linking in different content areas in the specification into one whole question. But your 9-marker structure still stays the same. You still have to describe and you still have to evaluate, but here you are just because it gives us a STEM as well, you still need to apply. So for here, because it's split into AO1, AO2, and AO3, for this one, it would be I'd say 3 marks for this. No, 2 marks for your description, 2 marks for your application, and then still 5 marks for your analysis and evaluation. Because it's only 2 marks, you may think you don't have to write much, but you still have to be in-depth. Usually synoptic questions, I write more. Synoptic questions don't have to be this as well. They could also be, for example, a question, describe the War of the Ghost study, like here, and evaluate the research method used. So in that case, you would evaluate the lab experiments. So for this one here, you can see in the mark scheme. For AO1, you could say basically firstly outline Bartlett's study. So it's a study that investigated It's a theory that investigated reconstructive memory. So it says we record different pieces of information and then recombine them to make a whole and to make meaning of the situation. Then You can also say that we are prone to error when we reconstruct our memory. And then you can also talk about the evidence of the War of the Ghosts. So in the War of the Ghosts study, this reconstructive memory theory can be seen as participants changed the order, changed different words, did all this, did all that. Furthermore, so it also asks you to link this with one language and thought content area. So you can combine this study, this theory, with, for example, Piaget or Sapir-Whorf's hypothesis. So, for example, Sapir-Whorf described how our language determines the structure of our thought processes. So, for example, here, in the War of the Ghosts study, Bartlett saw that the different cultures, the difference in cultures between the English Cambridge students and the native people that the story belonged to, determined how we changed the information recalled. So the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis shows that our language, so what we see, what we hear, what we read, can determine the structure of our thought processes. So how we perceive a certain story. It could be because we saw, yeah, basically that. And then next one, our AO2. So our AO2 is the application. So the application for this would be applying it to the STEM. So using this application here, we can say that, for example, the unfamiliar language used in War of the Ghosts study may have caused participants to recall the story inaccurately because of Bartlett's reconstructive memory theory. This might be why Tim did state he found the task very difficult to do, because he found it difficult to memorize different aspects of the story because he's not familiar with the words used. The story was then retold and recalled in a way that made sense using existing schemas. So his existing perception of what he saw, of what he thinks a canoe is, for example. He perceives the canoe as a fishing boat because that's what he's familiar with. Therefore, he recalls it as a fishing boat. Furthermore, and our evaluation. So when we're evaluating a synoptic question, we want it to be balanced. So for this one, I suggest you would do, for example, 2 evaluation points on Bartlett's theory, and then 2 evaluation points on Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. So you can see here they've done a couple evaluation points for Bartlett, and then evaluation points for Sapir-Whorf and also Piaget's. And yeah, that's it. So if you want to pause and read that again, you can. That's pretty much it for this lesson. So we went over the structure of different questions and how to answer some basic 9 markers and some lower mark questions as well. Thank you.